This is the Economic Club of Florida, a distinguished platform for discussion of the major national issues of the day. On today's program, Brian Stahl of Tyndall Air Force Base on the massive rebuilding underway after living through the direct hit of a Category 5 Hurricane Michael.
24-inch thick concrete walls you could put your hand on and feel it vibrating. I'm retired Air Force Reserve, and I was reminded of a time when I was in Afghanistan and under a rocket attack, and kind of the same feeling that you had there. You felt like you're probably going to be okay, but you weren't really sure.
Good day and welcome to the 531st in our series of distinguished speaker programs. I'm Harvey Bennett for the Economic Club of Florida. With us today is Brian Stahl, Deputy Base Civil Engineer at Tyndall Air Force Base near Panama City, Florida. He not only survived 2018's Hurricane Michael, a Cat 5 storm that clobbered the air base and a good chunk of Florida's panhandle, but he's now a leader in the tremendous multi-billion-dollar rebuilding of the base and thus the local economy too. Brian, you actually stayed on the base rather than evacuate as Hurricane Michael approached. Why? And tell us what you went through. That's amazing.
Part of my job is to be part of the team that stays behind when you have a hurricane that comes ashore. We do occasionally have those in the panhandle of Florida. The intent of that team staying behind is to be able to quickly recover and reopen the base after a storm passes. In this situation, the storm was projected to be Category 2, maybe a Category 3 storm. Normally, what would happen is the team would ride out the hurricane. As soon as it's passed, you go out, you start assessing damage, you start figuring out what needs to be fixed, and you make a plan to bring people back and you reopen the airbase, and hopefully that takes place within a couple of days. In this case, the storm strengthened in intensity significantly over the last 24, 36 hours. Mm-hmm. So what we thought was going to be a Category 2 or 3 storm turned out to be a Category 5 hurricane. Mm. And the damage was much more extensive than that small group of 93 people could possibly repair or even assess. So the Air Force brought in resources from all over immediately. The Air Force response to this was incredible. Even though we didn't have commercial power, we didn't have water, we didn't have sewer, we showed up with 3 days worth of food because that's what we planned to be there for. So we were fortunate the Air Force resupplied and sustained us afterward. But really the purpose of that team staying behind is it's twofold. One is the security of the base, to make sure you still have some aircraft that are there that just can't fly out, and then is to recover the base quickly after a hurricane passes. And the building that you hunkered down in suffered some significant damage. Tell us about that. So it was a sturdy building. It was reinforced concrete, 24-inch reinforced concrete walls with a concrete roof deck, but it did have some antenna towers that were on top, and specifically one 35-foot antenna tower, and it fell at the peak of the hurricane, and it ripped the roof membrane, and water came pouring into the emergency operations center where we were, and did cause damage to the building. But that was probably, we felt at the time, the most secure, safe building to be in on base during the hurricane. Yeah. And you had to scramble, didn't you? We were on the second floor when the antenna tower fell. Water started pouring into the second floor, and we had electronics, satellite phones, and computers and things like that. So we were scrambling and gathering up things and going down to the first floor. Fortunately, we had some people there, some craftsmen there that were able to slow the leak a little bit, not stop it, but slow the leak down so that we didn't get completely flooded. But yes, there was significant damage from the water to that building. And you suffered wind gusts they estimated of 139 plus miles per hour. Is there any point you didn't think you were going to make it? Well, that's a great question. So the sustained winds, official sustained winds from Michael, were 161 miles an hour. Wow. With gusts up to 201 miles an hour. Wow. the pressures that you experience when you have those kind of wind speeds are the third lowest pressures ever recorded in the U.S. It surpassed Hurricane Andrew, and when you got those gusts, your ears popped. 24-inch thick concrete walls, you could put your hand on and feel it vibrating. I wouldn't say that I was concerned that I was going to die, but there was a point there where I was reminded. I'm retired Air Force Reserve, and I was reminded of a time when I was in Afghanistan and under a rocket attack, and kind of the same feeling that you had there. You felt like you're probably going to be okay, but you weren't really sure.
And what, more than 4,000 personnel or 7,000 personnel plus families evacuated the base. What happened to your family?
So my family, I sent them up to Alabama the weekend before the hurricane. I started tracking it and realizing that it was probably coming. I still didn't think it was going to be as intense as it was, but I knew I needed to get them out of there because I knew I would be at the base and I didn't need to worry about their safety. So I made reservations for them up in Alabama, and they ended up being gone for 2 or 3 weeks after the storm before they were actually able to come back to our home.
We're going to hear shortly about your current repair project to repair the damage from Hurricane Michael on base, but also the greater master plan to make it what the Air Force is pledging to be the Air Force Base of the future. That's got to be exciting. What a huge project.
That is exciting. It is, great tragedy. A lot of times brings great opportunity. And I think in this case, the Air Force has an opportunity to finally create the base of the future that they've been talking about for a number of years, and this is part of this is because almost over half of the buildings on the base are going to be demolished. So that clears out a lot of real estate that you can rebuild back smartly. You can actually take a little bit of time and plan and put facilities where they make sense. The other piece that's made that possible is the federal government has decided that Tyndall Air Force Base is an important asset to the nation, and Congress has already authorized and appropriated the full $3 billion needed to rebuild the installation. And we've gotten support and endorsement for that rebuilding effort at the highest levels of government in the U.S.
That's terrific. And what an economic impact to the region, Panama City, greater Panama City, because the base is the largest economic engine, the largest employer in the region.
Right. Yes. It's Tyndall generates about $600 million a year for Bay County and employs directly about 5,500 military and civilian employees. And then there are several thousand other contractors and companies that are supported by Tyndall's economic engine.
That's big. Brian, thank you. We certainly look forward to hearing more of your story and learning more about the exciting rebuilding of Tyndall Air Force Base and the huge benefit that it's expected to have for Florida's Panhandle region.
Thank you.
And now, here's Ben Bowersox, Senior Vice President and Wealth Advisor at Capital City Trust Company, with our formal introduction.
It's always dangerous having a Navy guy introduce an Air Force guy, but I'll stay with the script. So, Mr. Stahl, our guest speaker today, is the deputy-based civil engineer at Tyndall Air Force Base over in Panama City, Florida. He has spent over 30 years managing Air Force construction programs at numerous military bases all around the world. But on October 10th, 2018, he probably faced his biggest challenge with a Hurricane Michael. At the time, Mr. Stahl was serving as the Emergency Operations Center Deputy Director when one of only 4 Cat 5 storms hit the area. And I'm sure you all are very familiar with Hurricane Michael. With that storm, it destroyed over 480 buildings on the base. Now, the base is enormous. It's 29,000 acres. There's probably 500 buildings total with about 800 additional housing units. He's essentially an engineer for a small city with an amazing Air Force. And so as part of his role, he's essentially monitoring and responsible for not just the day-to-day of the buildings, but for the fire department, the emergency response teams, the EOD. So it's a small city with really big bombs. So that's all in his world, and all of that was frankly leveled in in October of 2018. So what have they done? Well, the Air Force came to Brian and asked he and his team to basically rebuild the base, to be the base of the future. And I think we're going to hear a lot about that today. To me, it almost kind of sounded like he gets to build like the new Epcot, an example of what bases are going to be, but it's an Epcot with missiles, guns, and F-22. So to me, the best of both worlds. But saying all that, just a little bit of background on Brian. He received his bachelor's degree in biomedical engineering from Louisiana Tech University in 1989. Go Bulldogs. He graduated from the University of Texas at San Antonio with an MBA. And more importantly, he had a nearly 30-year career as an Air Force officer, ending his career as a colonel, earning a Bronze Star, a Legion of Merit, and countless other awards. So, guys, without further ado, I'd like to introduce retired Colonel Brian Stahl.
Thanks very much, Ben. Is this microphone on? It is on, right? So
they say it is.
I have to use two hands to flip my slides, so I think so. So I'll get right into this. Tyndall Air Force Base. It's around the Air Force. A lot of people think of Tyndall as a small Air Force base in the Panhandle of Florida. As Ben said, it's not tiny. It's 29,000 acres. There were before Michael. There were 74 aircraft, most of them F-22s. There is limited encroachment issues. That's an issue that affects Air Force bases and missions around the world. That you have cities that build right up to an Air Force base, so that encourages lawsuits and things like that. Tyndall is on a peninsula, so we have water on three sides, and the city of Mexico Beach on the other side. So not a lot of encroachment issues there. 129 miles of coastline. There were 484 buildings before the hurricane. It also is the largest economic driver in Bay County. 5,500 military and civilian jobs directly. There are thousands of other contract jobs and other businesses that are supported by Tyndall Air Force Base. It's almost $600 million a year economic impact to Bay County, so you can imagine that's huge. The pictures I show up here, the one on the lower right, that shows you the Gulf of Mexico ranges. And those are important because right now, to the east of that military mission line, there's no drilling, and so the fighters that train in the Gulf can go out and they shoot missiles. They can shoot other unmanned aircraft and shoot them down without having to worry about deconflicting with oil rigs and things like that. Tyndall is the only base that has direct access to a range like that without flying over populated areas. And that's important when you're carrying live bombs and things that blow up. And so I will tell you, before I get into Hurricane Michael, after Hurricane Michael, there was a lot of discussion about, well, why do we need Tyndall? Why don't we just close it? It's just like Homestead. We don't need that. Let's close it. People quickly realized that, wait a second, there's a lot of value. There's a lot of things that Tyndall brings that no other base in the world brings. I'll get to let's see. Some of the missions that go on at Tyndall, one of the big ones is 1st Air Force or AF North. They are a vital part of the Homeland Defense mission. They have the monitoring and defense of the airspace above all of North America. On 9/11, if you remember, there was a Major General Arnold that was on the news a lot afterwards, and he was the guy that had the authority to shoot down commercial aircraft if he had to. Well, that position still resides at Tyndall Air Force Base. There's a 3-star that's there now. The 53rd Weapons Evaluation Group, 53rd WEG here, that is when I talk about going out over the Gulf of Mexico. The 53rd WEG, one of their missions is they bring in fighter aircraft from all over the world, units from all over the world. They hold exercises. They go out over the Gulf of Mexico, and it is the one time fighter pilots get to shoot live missiles at other airplanes and actually shoot them down. And so that mission has been pretty much constant, except for a couple of months after the hurricane, it has been going on continuously for years and will for the foreseeable future. A couple of the other missions there are Air Force-wide, the Air Force Civil Engineer Center, the Air Force-wide headquarters for civil engineer issues. 325th Fighter Wing is the host wing at Tyndall. They were, currently the 325th Fighter Wing is an F-22 wing. So before the hurricane, you had two squadrons of F-22s. You had one that was combat coded, as we call it. Those are the ones that they're trained up, they're ready to go to war. There's another squadron there that did all of the training for all the F-22 pilots in the Air Force. So they all came through Tyndall. Since the storm, the combat coded squadron the aircraft got dispersed to other units, so that squadron no longer exists. The training squadron is operating out of Eglin Air Force Base over in the Fort Walton Beach area. And that mission is planned to move up to Langley Air Force Base in Virginia in about a little over a year. So, let's talk about Hurricane Michael. October 10th? Yeah, October 10th is a date that will live in infamy in my mind, at least. We were expecting a Cat 2, maybe Cat 3 hurricane coming towards the Panama City, Tyndall area. We had a ride-out element, we call. There were 93 of us that were on the base. If you look at I guess I should change the slide so you can see what I'm looking at right here. It would be better. If you look at the pictures here, on the left, you've got the radar image when Michael came ashore. Underneath that, you see where the green is. The green on the left is the west end of Tyndall. The green on the right is the east end of Tyndall. So it was as if Tyndall had a big bullseye painted on it when the hurricane came ashore. It was a Category 5, as Ben said, one of only 4 that have hit the U.S. It had the third lowest pressure of any hurricane that's hit the U.S. It surpassed Andrew, and 161 mile an hour winds were sustained with peaks of 201 miles an hour. So this picture on the right, that is our Emergency Operations Center. That's me in the green shirt. This is happy times here. This is we're waiting for the storm to come in. Well, then the storm came in. And that was what it looked like. Parts of it looked like afterwards. So that same room we were in on the top right there, we see all the water. We lost part of the roof during the storm. A lot of water came in. We just had to deal with it until the storm was over. We did have 93 people that were on the base. We had no commercial power, no water for about 2 weeks. We did have generators on a lot of buildings, so we weren't without electricity completely. One of the big issues we had to deal with was cell service. Verizon's towers were down for most of Bay County for 2 weeks. And the government, because we do things efficiently, we had gone to one carrier for all of our cell phones, right? And of course it was Verizon. And we had satellite phones. You think, okay, satellite phone, that works everywhere. They don't. If you're standing on 1 foot with the antenna tilted at the right time of day, it works, but otherwise they don't work that well. When we showed up as the ride-out element, we were prepared to stay 3 days. You know, our job is to come there. As soon as the storm passes, you go out, you assess the damage, you start figuring out how to get it fixed, you get the base back open, and you go back home. Well, when we walked out of the shelter, there was no getting back to normal anytime soon, and we quickly recognized that. These are some of the pictures on the flight line, some of the hangars. So we had 6 hangars at Tyndall before the hurricane. 5 of them will be demolished. This is the kind of damage that you saw. The one in the middle was actually a paint booth, and I don't know if you can see the huge doors that were on there. They weigh several thousand pounds. They were closed before the storm. The storm pulled them open. There also were, you may have seen on the news, I can talk about this because it was on the news now, so there were a number of F-22s that were at Tyndall during the hurricane, and this was a huge issue. One, people asked, well, why did you not get those out of there? Well, believe me, the wing commander, if he could have gotten them out of there, would have gotten them out of there. You don't leave $150 million aircraft in harm's way like that. They've just had issues with maintaining those jets, and as quick as this storm came in, they just couldn't get them back together to get them out. So there were 17 F-22s at Tyndall. That's a lot of money, a lot of value. And a lot of them were stuffed into hangars, and most of them had some type of damage on them. But I will tell you, at the end of the day, it took a couple of months to get there. Every one of them flew out of Tyndall. Every one of them flew. So the wing commander was especially happy about that, because there was the day after the storm, this guy in a helicopter flew over and took a picture down through the roof of one of the hangars, and there was it wasn't actually a real F-22, it was a training model of an F-22, and that was what was on the nightly news. And the Secretary of Defense saw that and went, I want that wing commander fired. So luckily he didn't get fired. He was an awesome guy. He's gone on to bigger and better things now. So we had a lot of facilities. We had partial failure. The one on the top left was the building that I actually worked in on a daily basis. Luckily, I wasn't in that building during the storm. On the top right, that is was an aircraft maintenance hangar, I guess, but it was built actually fairly recently, and it was designed to withstand 130 mile an hour winds. That's the standard that we were building to at Tyndall before the hurricane. And you can see the kind of damage that it did to that building. We have since torn that one down. The one on the bottom left, you see the block wall that's fallen in. That was just a concrete block wall with no reinforcement. And when we had construction like that didn't hold up very well. It collapsed. And these are pictures of ones that just flat out, these buildings are just gone. It was just amazing that you go out and you see, there was a building here. I was sent a bunch of these pictures one day, and I was asked to go identify what buildings they were. It took me a long time to figure it out because, you see just piles of rubble in a lot of cases. And I keep forgetting you guys can't see when I change up here, so there. All right, our air traffic control tower. I don't know if you can see, but there were several windows that were blown out of that. All of the electronics inside were destroyed. Ben talks about Air Force, and he's an aviator. I'm just an engineer. I don't fly planes. About a month after the storm, us engineers found out that the control tower is actually important to it was amazing. I joke about that, but we didn't. It is especially important for a fighter base, apparently, and we didn't know that it needed to get back up very quickly. So we did get it back up. It took a few months. On the top right is our main fire station. You can see the roof is gone. There was metal laying on the fire trucks. Our firefighters are very resourceful. They got in, got all those trucks out. We got a temporary roof on this building, and they still are operating out of this building almost 2 years later. We do have plans to replace it, but they are still in that building. The boats there, so we had a marina, and it had this great little restaurant, 2-story restaurant right on the water you could go to, and there's nothing there. We found pieces of that in the woods. These boats, we have a barrier island at Tyndall, Shell Island, and these boats are on the Gulf side of Shell Island, so they went up over Shell Island about 3 miles to the east of the marina, which is where they were tied up. So the vehicles there on the bottom right, that's just an example of some of the damage that was done. Interestingly enough, most vehicles, like the vehicles that we own, the ones that were in the shelter, most of them were damaged, but they're all sitting where we parked them. You go to some parts of the base, and there's cars laying on top of each other. So something happened there. We're not exactly sure what. We suspect tornado or whatever caused some of those damages. So we've started assessing some of this damage and figuring out that we've got a mess. And we started hearing these conversations about, well, why are we going to do anything with Tyndall? Let's close it. And it's not long afterwards, though, the Secretary of the Air Force came out and said, we are going to rebuild Tyndall. We are going to rebuild it. We're going to make it the installation of the future. We're going to put 3 squadrons of F-35s at Tyndall, and we're going to make this a great place to be again. The Vice President came down and made additional announcements of missions that were staying there. The President actually came down later on too, and said we're gonna rebuild Tyndall. So we are rebuilding Tyndall. Now it takes support of Congress to do that too. Fortunately, and I'll get into some of the specifics of that, Congress has been very, very supportive. And between fiscal year 2019 and 2020, they have actually already authorized and appropriated all of the money that's going to be needed to rebuild Tyndall. So we're not waiting for, there's not some political will that's going to change out there that may decide not to fund it. Right now, the money is there. So installation of the future, though. This was one of the things we learned when you go through something like this that really nobody's gone through before. In my mind, I'm thinking, they're going to tell us how to fix this. You know, who is they? I don't know who they is. I still don't know who they is. So defining installation of the future was kind of left up to a group of us. And so we have slowly but surely worked our way through, what does installation of future mean? Well, in our case, it means you're going to demolish half of the buildings on the base because they need to be demolished, and which is going to create these open spaces that weren't open before, and you can come back in and go, now what makes sense to go there? And how do we build it so it makes sense, so it's adaptable for future use? How is it, so that we make efficient use of space, so we're not wasting money building new buildings. We do things like create campus concepts. You have the runway area, you only need buildings that are associated with the runway there. You have a life support, a support area. You have dormitories, but you also have facilities that the people that live in those dormitories want to use, and they can walk and they can bike and they can, don't have to get in their cars to travel places. Also, installation of the future, a big part of it, after having gone through something like this, is the facilities need to be resilient. We had a couple of members of the U.S. Congress that came down, and I heard from both of their mouths say, if you rebuild this and you build it to the same standards you built it to before, and it falls down again, we're not rebuilding this again. And so that was obviously taken to heart, and I'll get into some of the standards that we're using. I gotta quit. I'm just going to start using this. I'm confusing myself over here. So this is just a map of Tyndall. As you can see, it's a peninsula, 3 sides. To start the planning from this, usually when you create a master plan for a base, you spend about 2 years building it. The storm hit in October, and we had our first kind of final version of the master plan in February or March. So it was all hands on deck, Navy term, right? Is that Navy term? Okay. All hands on deck making this happen. But one of the first things we did was we divide the base up into different zones. And I'll focus a little bit on the 2 zones here. The flight line zone and the support zone are the ones that we're doing the bulk of the work in. On the flight line, the flight line runway area, right? So closest to the runway, that's where all of our hangars are and were. But most of those are going to be torn down. I think the control tower I showed and one of the hangars will still be standing. All of the other buildings in that area will be torn down. So an opportunity to build that smartly. So in the F-35 zone, 3 brand new hangars. This WEG, Weapons Evaluation Group zone, there's going to be it's got 2 hangars, it's a big complex for all the units that come in from all over the world to go out, fly over the Gulf. And MQ-9 was something I didn't mention, was something that the Air Force was looking at before Hurricane Michael. MQ-9 is one of the unmanned aircraft, and they still are looking at putting a wing of 24 of these at Tyndall, which brings about 2,000 military jobs additional above and beyond what we had before Michael. The final decision on this one hasn't been made yet. Even if it doesn't come here, though, that area is now a viable option for other missions that the Air Force might want to put at Tyndall in the future. This was the support side of the base. One of the big things here is, and I guess they're not really shown very clearly on there, is walking paths, biking paths, with an eye towards the future. So the paths are built, they're 4, 6, 8 feet wide, but there's basically a right-of-way that we could expand those to 20 or 30 feet in the future. And the thought is, autonomous vehicles might be a thing in the future. And so you need some place for those to travel. So you build that it doesn't cost you anything to preserve that space. You build that into your future plan. Construction standards that we're using. So with the hurricane, there's really 2 things that do damage. There's water and there's wind. And so we worked with the Air Force to develop standards for Tyndall for new construction and for repairs of existing buildings. So we created a design flood elevation, which is basically you don't build the building below this level because you don't want it to flood. We came up with a standard of 19 feet on the south side, the Gulf of Mexico side of Tyndall, and on the bay side of 14 feet. And this is based on projections of sea level rise over the next 100 years and anticipation of the worst case storm to hit here. We also looked at wind speed ratings for buildings. Developing these, a couple of us went down to Miami and met with the Miami-Dade code enforcement people, the ones that write the codes and develop these, and just got a lot of good info on how they do business there, and adopted a lot of what they're doing there. We did not adopt wholesale the wind loads that they're using in Miami, but close to it. So every building on Tyndall will have a wind load rating of at least 165 miles an hour when we're done. The ones that are higher priority, fire stations, the hangars, things like that, they're going to be built and repaired to 170 miles an hour. So this is going to include your impact rated windows and doors and things like that. So it is going to be a much more resilient installation when we're all said and it's all said and done. Installation facility standards are something else that we created. A part of that is architectural standards. So in the past, a typical Air Force base, you would get money and you would go and design to a certain architectural style, and then you wouldn't get money for 10 years, and the next people would come along and they get money and they liked a different architectural style, and it didn't always fit together and it didn't always make sense for that environment or that location. And so we decided we needed a standard for Tyndall. And we worked with a couple of architect firms that had, I don't remember how many architects worked on this, but there were several. Some that worked, worldwide stuff, and then we also had a couple of local ones that brought in, the local flavor into our standards. So the picture in the middle is actually an existing building on Tyndall. It's one that we built in 2009. It's a gym. There's a lot of features of that we have captured in the facility standards going forward. This is just an example of one of the first buildings that's going to be rebuilt. It's a fire station, not a replacement for the other one, but a different fire station. But this is pointing out that the materials are going to be energy efficient, they're going to be resilient, minimize maintenance cost, the shapes of the roofs are supposed to be more resilient, things like that. And these are some examples of some of the ones that have been designed. It seems like every other day right now where we are in the process of designing this program, we're getting a new design. It's really cool actually to look at a different building every day. But up on the upper left there is our aircraft hangars. And so that's two of the three that we're going to be building for the F-35 campus. And you can see the F-35 simulator facility here. This is a maintenance squadron complex. You can see some of the architectural features that you'll see commonly in this area. OSS facility, that's where you've got some of your air traffic control stuff, some of your airfield management, weather, intelligence, things like that. Installation deployment center, so when you get large groups of people deploying, this is where they'll deploy through. Child Development Center, this is I think it's the second project that's actually been advertised. It is actually out for bids right now. They expect bids on that one next week, so that's an exciting one to see come to fruition. Airman dorm facilities, we got two 5-story dorms that are being built. And then briefly, by the numbers, there were 484 buildings before the storm. 247 either will be or have been demolished. And you might ask, well, you're 2 years after the storm, why haven't you demolished them? Well, the federal government places restrictions on itself that don't necessarily apply to everybody else. There's the law, National Environmental Policy Act laws that require you to go through an analysis of the impact of an action on the environment. The analysis required that law required us to do this analysis before we demolish buildings on base, believe it or not. So we were able to demolish a pretty good number of buildings, but more are still standing right now. But we've completed that study. We are now, over the next couple of weeks, going to be starting the demolition. So over the next 6 months, if you've been to Tyndall and you see these buildings standing 6 months from now, most of them won't be standing anymore. We did have the 6 hangars there. One of them is going to be repaired, and it'll be brought up to the 165 mile an hour standard. Family housing is something I'm probably not going to get into in great detail, but it's not government owned anymore. We privatized family housing there about 13 years ago. They did have 867 houses. The developer plans to bring back 593. But just like a lot of homeowners in that area, almost 2 years later, they're still fighting with their insurance company, believe it or not. And so they've only repaired about 100, less than 100 houses. And so that's not, I wouldn't consider that a success story at Tyndall, and I'm not sure how it's going to turn out, quite honestly. We did spend, in 2019, we spent $728 million for repairs. And a lot of that was, normally, if you've dealt with government contracts before, they send out a request for proposal, people submit their proposal, you negotiate, and it takes weeks or months to award a contract. In this case, after the storm, we didn't have time for that. And so the Air Force has a mechanism they went to a contractor and said, fix that building. And then after they fix it, then we'll figure out what it cost. They had to justify what they spent and what they charged, but that was a lot of the $728 million, was to get things back, repaired as quickly as possible. We do have another $328 million of repairs that we will have on contract by the end of next month for this year. Now, all of those were done through the normal process and a lot more well thought out. But then there's also the big program piece here is the $3 billion that Congress allocated between FY19 and FY20. And so that's exciting stuff. So there's 42 projects. Those 42 projects, some of them have multiple buildings within them, 5 hangars, a bunch of dorms, a bunch of other stuff. Some of the challenges that we still face, though, going forward with getting this program executed, is that requirements are changing. We developed that first master plan in just a couple of months, and we didn't get it 100% correct. And other decisions have been made along the way that have changed things. So it's constantly evolving. Competition for skilled labor and materials. Bay County has 180,000 people roughly. The skilled labor force there is not, even before the hurricane, the skilled labor force was in the hundreds. And of those hundreds, even fewer can actually get on the base because of security requirements. So, but the rebuild is going to take thousands. And so contractors are going to have to bring in people from all over the place. One of the issues that we're dealing with is, where do they live? The local community isn't real excited about bringing in several thousand people with their families and sending them to schools to only 3 years later, then pulling them out of schools and moving elsewhere. So we're trying to figure out, working with the local community, solutions to that problem. The timely construction contract awards, that is, although Congress has given us the money, we have 5 years to get it awarded to a contractor. But as long as it's sitting there, Congress can change their mind and decide they're going to take it back. So there is a huge effort to get this awarded as quickly as possible. I already talked about the environmental stuff, and then zone and projects, all the different zones and different projects. You may have one contractor working in one zone, a different contractor working in the zone next to him, and they're both dumping their stormwater on each other or whatever. So we got to deconflict those and resolve the conflicts between those projects and zones. Just briefly, the timeline. We did a lot of permanent repairs early on. We're in the late stages of design of the entire program, and then really the permanent construction will start late this year with a couple of projects, but it'll really get in full swing. You're still probably talking about a year from now before you really start seeing like hangars and things like that getting constructed. I think this is my last slide. So the future of Tyndall, it's going to be the installation of the future. It is going to be the installation of the future. Brian Stahl, this is no government endorsement or anything, Brian Stahl's opinion, just knowing and seeing what has been designed and knowing what is going to be constructed, I look at it and go, anybody that comes through here 5 years from now is going to go, wow, this is what the Air Force needs. We need more of this. And maybe we need more of this at Tyndall Air Force Base, quite honestly, because they did it right. I think we're doing this the right way. So there are supposed to be 3 squadrons of F-35s. The first one is scheduled to arrive in September of 2023. So 2 years from now, you'll see the first F-35 arriving at Tyndall. To me, that's exciting. Maybe the MQ-9 unmanned aircraft wing, maybe something else. There were 5,500 military and civilian jobs at Tyndall before. After the storm, I think we dropped down to around 4,000 because a lot of them went over to Eglin. But after we get rebuilt, you're going to see that number back up to 6,000, maybe even greater than that. And then we're going to have a resilient base that's going to withstand, the next storm or whatever, whatever gets thrown our way. And I think this is going to be, I think this is going to be a shining star for the Panhandle and for the Air Force. And so I look forward to seeing how this all turns out. And that was my last slide.
Are there any questions from members in the audience?
Yeah, does anybody have a question? I'll be glad to bring you the microphone.
Thank you so much for that presentation. Thanks for your service to the people of the United States. What advice do you have for folks on the Texas-Louisiana border over the next couple of days?
Wow, that's a great question. I thought about that this morning. I have friends that live there, and a couple of them were talking about evacuating. That would be my advice: evacuate, get out of the way. For a couple of reasons. One, it's a storm of that magnitude, it's dangerous. I mean, quite honestly, I think we were fortunate that more people didn't get killed. The 180,000 people in Bay County, and I don't know what the exact number was, but I've been told that 25,000 people evacuated. So that means the majority of the people in Bay County stayed. And there were, if you saw the damage afterwards out in the community, it's just crazy. So my advice to them would be evacuate, and when it's safe to come back, then come back.
I have a question, Brian. So when you and the other people hunkered down in the shelter, how long was it that you stayed there where, just before the wall got there when the highest wind, how long did it take the eye to go over your facility and then catch the backside of the eye? How long did that all last?
So as long as I don't get in trouble for telling you this story, because I might have gotten in trouble for telling this story, but no. So the eye wall, the front edge of the storm came in around noon on that Wednesday, and the first part of the storm probably lasted, it seemed like forever, but I think it was probably about 45 minutes or an hour. That was one of the, if there's any saving graces in this storm, it was one of the saving graces, and it was moving so fast. It was moving so fast that it was still a Category 3 storm in southeast or southwest Georgia, but at the same time, it didn't cause a lot of flooding because it was going so fast. So the eye came over, and at least 67 of us went outside because I thought, experience of a lifetime, right? How many people get to walk around in the eye of a hurricane? And so we did. So we went outside. We probably were out there 10 minutes. And then we went back inside, and then the second half probably took another hour and a half. So it was, by the time it was all said and done, so we came in around noon. By 4:30 or 5, that we still were getting winds, but the storm had pretty much passed by about then.
Was there any loss of life?
Not on Tyndall. In Mexico Beach, yes, there was. Mexico Beach down, if you're familiar where that is, down to the east of Tyndall. they were on that eastern eye wall. That's where you get your storm surge, you get your worst winds, everything. They had, I've been told, 15 to 20 feet of water when you add in the wave height, 15 to 20 feet of water in Mexico Beach. They had entire houses that were on the south side of Highway 98 that looked like they were intact, but sitting on the north side of 98. And there were people there. So the numbers I heard are nowhere near what I think they could have been, though.
Hi, how are you? I had the privilege of touring Tyndall a couple months after the hurricane, and all that seems familiar. I think what struck me the most was the residential housing. I know you said that it's not a part of Tyndall, but I mean, it was flat. All the houses were not livable. So my question is, how much did you work with the city and the county surrounding to get places for people to live? Because obviously not everybody left, and so they had to go somewhere. Just wanted to know the efforts you had with the surrounding county and city.
Yeah, so that was one thing that I would say, that's one thing that Tyndall has that not every military base has, is a very supportive local community, very active military affairs committee. That being said, we're all in the same boat. Nobody had housing, so people were living in Fort Walton Beach, commuting to Tyndall because there was no housing available in the local area. Yes, we evacuated everybody out of housing. No, people were allowed to come back in a few weeks later to get what they could get out. At the same time, though, the local developers saw opportunities, I think, and there are thousands of homes that are being built right now in the local community. So in the short term, the first year after the storm, housing was a huge issue, and any of the local community leaders would tell you that. I think it's gotten better now, and I think another year from now it'll be in a really good position. But to your question, I didn't completely answer your question. We worked with the local community leaders. I'm not sure we actually affected any action to make that better because everybody was kind of struggling to figure it all out at that time.
You've been listening to Brian Stahl, Deputy Base Civil Engineer at Tyndall Air Force Base, speaking before the Economic Club of Florida on August 26, 2020 in Tallahassee, Florida. For more information on the base and its rebuilding, visit tyndall.af.mil. The Economic Club of Florida promotes interest and enlightenment on important economic, political, and social issues of the day. To learn more, including how to become a member, visit our website at economic-club.com. This program was recorded at the Governor's Club in Tallahassee, Florida.